Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Pinal County Community College District Governing Board Retreat. It is July 21st, 9 o'clock local time. We have several items on the agenda today. The times beside them are just estimates. I feel we can take the time we need to discuss these, but we are respective of everyone's time. A lot of resources. A lot of people have put a lot of time into getting this on a virtual Zoom meeting for us. So we're very appreciative of that. They will stick with us throughout the duration of this meeting, and definitely appreciative. Just for the record, I'd like to do a roll call. Mary Lou, would you mind doing a roll call for us?
Of course. Board Member Gladys Christensen.
Was I still mute? I'm here.
Board Member Odie Orn.
Here.
Board Member Waldron.
Here.
Board Member Gibson.
Present.
Vice President Chris Wadga.
Here.
Vice President Brandy Bain.
Here.
Vice President Jenny Cardenas. I believe she's having technical issues. We'll come back. Vice President Mary Kay Gilliland.
Present.
Vice President Jenny Cardenas. Okay, we'll give her a minute to connect back. And of course, Board President Dan Miller.
Yes, I'm here. All right, I think we can still begin. I want to make sure that all the board members were present. Jackie, I think you have a few items on here. If you'd like to take it away, the floor is yours.
Sure, thank you. So the first item was the monitoring report review, and we always do this at the July retreat just to check, is the target still what it should be? Is the data providing you with the information that you need? And so I think you all have that document, but I think they were going to put it up here as well. There we go. So thank you. Is it Rob or Michael who's going to drive for us? But thank you for doing that. So this time it was really, I had a few that I wanted to point out. As you know, that many of the board monitoring reports are also replicated on the strategic plan. And so the board doesn't really, you initially maybe set the target for those, and then the strategic planning committee adopted them as well. We're going to be redoing the strategic plan here in January. I suspect it's going to look very different than our current one because of COVID-19. Has certainly been a game changer in a positive way. We have to rethink our entire business model. So for outcome 1, I did put a note on 1.2 that the developmental education completion rate was a measure that the board had as a monitoring report. However, initially we had plans to eliminate developmental education and move towards what we call co-requisite support or co-support and support labs. So we potentially will not in the near future have actual developmental courses that students would enroll in. They would actually have support labs. So we wouldn't really have this measure going forward. So I propose that maybe we eliminate that monitoring report moving forward, and that college level course completion rate would show us our success levels with the support labs. So I'll just kind of leave it up to the board to have discussions about outcome one and any thoughts that you may have.
Any thoughts, board?
No, I guess my only comment was we obviously want something that will be an effective measure of our success. So, you know, I'm happy with the college level course completion rate if that's going to provide us with the data we need to know how well we're doing.
So 1.3, David?
Yes. Well, there was talk there about eliminating that developmental education completion rate.
I think too, the national trend is to move away from dev ed as a course. And I think also removing it would help ensure that we don't slip back into bad habits of requiring students to take remedial courses. It lengthens the time to degree. And I would say, Dave, that 1.3 will still provide us an effective measure of how well students are doing in courses.
So you're talking about dropping it at 1.2?
1.2, just eliminating it as a board monitoring report.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Rick.
Dr. Elliott, do you feel that the outcomes that we have here that we're able to measure will measure student success as they either transfer into the university or they move down out of the education process into the workforce? And I know that's a difficult thing to do, and I know that it's hard to gather those kind of numbers, but it would seem that somehow those long-term benefits would be very valuable to us in the future.
I don't disagree. I'm just thinking about how we get the data on those. We do a graduate survey, and that is an employment survey, an employment measure that we have later in another outcome. We have transfer rate, but that doesn't necessarily indicate how successful they are at the four-year institution. That I don't have an answer because that would be we do have our student success rates information from, I think, NAU, ASU provides it for us. But we don't get that information from all the universities. And of course, students may transfer out of state as well. But we do have that for ASU.
Well, there may not be an answer at this point in time, and it may not be all that valuable to what we're doing. It just seems to me that if we could get a feel for how our students do once they graduate, once they leave, once they go to another full-time university, not full-time, but four-year university, and how well they did there, might give us some insights of what we might be able to do here better. But it's very difficult. I know we've had this discussion before, but every time I look at outcome one, I keep thinking, how do we measure long-term benefits?
I spent several years trying to develop a process to get information from graduates at another institution. And we tried an awful lot of things. And frankly, it was very labor intensive. We put a lot of hours into it. It would be wonderful data to have, and we wanted it badly. But the fact was, we never got enough of a response rate to surveys that we tried and so on. So, we could say, gosh, 97% of our respondents are successful, and that's wonderful, and we feel really good. But what we have is 8% of our alumni responding. So we're talking about 97% of 8%, which is really kind of meaningless. And there are all sorts of biases that drive the high success rate when you get that sort of a response rate. So I agree, I would love to have it, but I'm afraid I don't have any meaningful suggestions as to how to get there.
We do know from the Community College Research Center that students who complete an associate's degree and then transfer to the four-year institution graduate at an 80% rate and graduate at a higher rate than students that start at the university. But that's national data, national research. So I guess one of the things that we could maybe focus on is and we do have this, the graduation rates, which are completion rates. So right now our completion rates are not what we want them to be, but the board had set a goal of 50%. So if we could reach, 50% completion rate, and that means any degree or certificate or higher, then we can be relatively confident that that would correlate with the national research stating that when students do transfer, they're they're more likely to graduate than students that are native to that institution. I mean, it's a loose correlation, but it is backed up in research and data from, the Community College Research Center. So, just a thought.
Thank you.
All right, Jackie, I had just a question. You're considering eliminating, or we are considering eliminating a few of these outcomes. So I'm wondering if we did elect to eliminate, does that mean we're just kind of archiving it? How difficult is it post COVID back into whatever the new normal is? How hard is it to get these reactivated if we deactivate?
Oh, it was simple. I archive everything. So anytime you make a modification to your monitoring reports, I archive the old one and the note on our new dashboard that we use internally, a notation like the board changed the target in 2019 to this, board eliminated 1.2, and then we can always go back and pull the archive if we wanted to bring it back. Yeah.
All right. So 2 years down the road, we decide to reactivate that. Would that show a 2-year gap in?
No, we would, if we reactivated it, it would mean that we were still offering developmental ed courses, which I
May
hope
not.
we're not. If we
Yeah.
are, then we would still have the data.
Okay. Yeah, this may be a bad example for that gap fill. But,
Yeah, that one might, the other one might be a better example, but yeah.
Okay.
We can always bring them back.
All right. Any other questions for Jackie? All right, proceed, please.
Okay, if we could scroll down to 2, I don't have control. This one also, outcome 2, you had a monitoring report for access on the percent of credit hours earned via alternate delivery. And this measure was to ensure that students had an opportunity for face-to-face in person, the traditional old online. And when I refer to that, that was more static, where students would log on, they would do their work. Online now for students looks exactly like this. They're having their faculty member, it's Zoom. We use Collaborate, which is much like Zoom. And then also hybrid and ITV. ITV is going away, it's archaic. COVID has pushed us into the virtual learning realm. Students have seemed to really adapt well to the virtual learning environment. And so I don't know if there is a need for us moving forward to encourage us as an institution to get away from the traditional all face-to-face to alternative methods, because now post-COVID, this is it.
Right. Discussion, anyone?
Well, it strikes me that it may make sense down the road. We'll probably want to develop some sort of new measures when we're firmly established in the new model, if you will. But it's clearly premature to try to do that at this point.
Yeah. And that's kind of, Dave, you have a good point, because as I start drafting what I think the new strategic plan is going to look like, there are things in that probably will then maybe spill over and become the new measure here when we kind of have a better idea. But when we really think about our business model and how we have adapted and changed, this one may not make sense moving forward, and probably will be replaced with something else.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
Jackie, a question here. If we were to redefine alternative delivery to face-to-face, would that make the data any more or less critical? I mean, we've always looked at alternative delivery as basically what we're doing here, online type thing. If we redefine that to say that's face-to-face, is that data still relevant or not?
I don't know. I wish I had an answer, but I think everything moving forward is going to be blended. It's going to be a mixture of maybe one day a week face-to-face, and then maybe then you do some static online, and then another day you have this. I think in my head, I think that's the future of higher ed. That's everything I'm reading too, is that moving forward, there won't be a single method of learning. It's going to be blended. And that might be really hard to track that data in a system.
It would be very difficult, I suspect.
It could be very difficult. And I think the future of higher ed is blended. And what that blended looks like may differ based on what the course is. So for instance, nursing courses, probably going to be a mixture of this, hands-on, didactic, and I wish I had a crystal ball and knew, but I don't. I think they're good. That whole traditional idea, I was on a national panel and we were talking about the whole idea of a 15-week semester. It's very archaic, but the federal government puts that requirement in place. And so we're working with the federal government and accrediting agencies and saying, why not do things in 8-week blocks? And so things are really disruptive right now. And I think that even that whole traditional 15-week semester is going to become an archaic concept. This is not a good time to ask me to have answers for anything. I just read a lot, but a lot of it is just predictive of what will look like post-COVID.
Thanks.
Exploring uncharted territory doesn't always begin with a map.
That's true.
All right, any other comments on outcome 2? Jackie, there are several communities, Pinal County may be in this group, but there are several communities who are struggling with remote learning, not from the educational standpoint, but from the receiver, the student. The families just don't have the right internet or the ability to receive this. Are you hearing that from any of our students, or do you project that to be somewhat of an issue on the receiving end?
I'm anticipating it's an issue when we are using our CARES dollars to buy hotspots that our students can check out. And and Jenny's working on that. We're in the process of making sure that students are able to have those hotspots in their home, that we'll use our CARES dollars for that.
If there was a decision made to monitor that sort of thing, would it fall into outcome 2, or is there another place it might be more appropriate for, the receiving side of online education?
That's a good question. We can maybe add, we survey the students, we do this SESI, the survey of student engagement. And often there's an opportunity to add a question or two. And perhaps we can work with SESI and see if we can add an access to technology, appropriate technology question to that survey. Very good point. It may already be on the survey, and we just haven't used that question as a monitoring report measure, but I'll make a note.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
that's going to be another one of those areas that's going to be tough to get the depth of data that we'd like to have, because the students that truly don't have sufficient access aren't going to become students in the first place. They're not going to sign up for something that they can't do.
Yeah, right. We might have to get creative on you know, getting information from that group, because if they have the ability but not the capability but not the ability to learn with us, then I think that's a gap we have to figure out how to fill.
Yeah, and to Dave's point, is many of the students, if they are accessing our website or admissions app, they're doing it from their schools. If they're in high school and they don't have the technology at home, they're using their high school computers and technology. Let me think on that and see if there's a way that we can, because right now the high schools are struggling with, like you said, the local schools are struggling with this as well. I know there is some federal legislation, and the state of Arizona has been talking about using some of their CARES dollars to increase broadband in remote and rural areas, which needed to be done for a long time.
I think if we
That
had
still
those,
doesn't, just because it's expanded doesn't mean that the family has the means to, you know, have internet access at home.
right. I think if we had some of that information, how that impacts CAC, it might help the overall bigger picture for Pinal County, along with the high schools. And
Somebody may have that data already statewide.
okay, David, I know you had something to say. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
That was pretty much what I was going to say. There may be some external data that could help us either. I don't know if it's federal, county, or state, but somebody probably knows what percentage of our citizens have access to broadband. It's not, you know, maybe as specific or granular as we'd like to have it, but it certainly would give us some indication.
Agreed. Okay. Anything else on outcome 2? All right, go ahead, Jackie, please.
That was it. Outcome 3, I didn't really have any, you know, suggestions or comments. I felt like that the graduate employment, our Jenny's team does a great job of actually calling all the graduates, and it's not just a survey and email. So that was a measure that we implemented, I think, a year ago, and a process, so that I felt like that one's working really well. And then the workforce training non-credit hours are still kind of in development of who's tracking that data for us. We've had some transitional people leave, moving some of those responsibilities over to James Bush and having new deans. So I didn't really have anything on 3. And of course you have all the graphs down below, and I'm sure you've all looked at them. So I don't know if any of you had some comments about them. And the same with 4, community ed enrollment and courses, events, and perception satisfaction. I felt like that we kind of cleaned some of those up last time with the targets and what you were looking for. So I didn't really have any comments on those.
Right.
And I think it's the same with 5. Again, we did quite a bit of work. You know, I think this is our 3rd or 4th time to review the monitor reports. So that first year we did a lot of cleaning up the targets and the measures. And so I feel like 3 and 4, 5 is working pretty well for monitor reports. And then if we could go down, the same with 6 and 7. So I didn't really have anything to add on any of those, but I'm happy to answer any questions or any discussion about any of them. I felt like we finally, usually takes about, we implemented the monitoring reports when I first came. And so, you know, I'm at the end of year 4, starting year 5, I figured it would take us that long to kind of get them where they were meaningful to the board and cleaned up a little bit. So kudos to you guys for keeping me on track.
All right. I think you've been pretty attentive to the outcomes, you and your staff, so I appreciate that. Open up to the board for any general comments on any of the outcomes, or just overall how we're monitoring at the college.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Rick.
Dr. Elliott, how do our outcomes that we have created for us, because they fit our needs, how well do they correlate with other community colleges that are on the cusp of being on the leading edge? Are we close to whatever everybody else is doing, or are we kind of molding it to what we need in our location?
As far as the monitoring reports that you have, we're pretty standard. We probably have a few more than most schools because we have quite a few. But I would say we're pretty much there. There's only a handful of colleges that really truly practice policy governance and actually have the monitoring reports. It's the Carver model, and Gladys knows a lot about this, and you too, Rick, because you guys were the ones that adopted it years ago. But the schools that tend to say that they have it don't necessarily always do the monitoring reports, and I think you have to. That's how you hold me accountable, hold the institutional accountable. And I think that's what you're asking. But Rick, if you're asking how we're performing compared to the other community colleges, a lot of these measures come from our statewide Arizona strategic plan, where we monitor many of these statewide as we compare ourselves to the other colleges. I do know in conversations with the other presidents, Cochise uses that strategic vision report and we use it, but I don't know if anybody else does.
Well, I appreciate that very much, and you got both parts of the question that I have. I think from my own part, my objective is to put the best product that we possibly can in front of the students so that they can be successful. And I was kind of wondering what other people in the country were doing to ensure that kind of a goal, and whether our model is achieving what we want it to do. I think it is. I feel it is. Just wanted your opinion. Thank you.
I think so. I mean, I think it's a model that should be presented at ACCT if we ever convene again in person. I think you guys as a board exemplify policy governance and how monitoring reports can be used to make decisions. And, I think I've told this story before, is that when the board set the monitoring report outcome of tuition and fees to be at or below the Arizona community colleges, when what the other community colleges were proposing for the year, not this year, but a previous year, Chris sent it to me, and I looked at where we were at, and I looked at where the average was, and I said, oh, we're still above the average. We're not raising tuition. And it made that decision happen in a matter of 2 seconds versus the VPs and I sitting around the table arguing for 20 minutes if we should raise tuition or not. And so for us, it also helps me and the VPs make decisions in an effective, timely manner, because we'll ask ourselves, well, is this a board outcome or monitoring report? And how will this decision impact that? So, because you guys don't always see that, but it is used in decision-making, the strategic plan and the monitoring reports. And it often helps us make decisions a lot more quickly and efficiently.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask a follow-up question.
Absolutely.
Dr. Elliott, is there any evidence that our students themselves are doing better because of the outcomes that we have set? Is it helping the student?
I think it indirectly helps the students because it forces us to change our processes and look at things. Here's a great example. We know that one of our processes is that we were requiring a reading course for all of our degrees. And we were seeing that some students had finished everything they needed to finish. And then they'd have to take this reading course, and they just didn't take the reading course to get their degree. And it was a barrier. And so when you look up at outcome 1 and degrees and certificates completed and our completion rate, it didn't make sense for us to keep having that reading course there. I mean, if a student has finished biology and psychology and English and done everything they needed to get their degree, why are we also making them take reading? So we removed that requirement to ensure that students are able to complete the degrees and certificates. So I think indirectly, it makes us look really closely at our policies, our processes, and our practices and say, well, why aren't these students completing their degree? Oh, it's this reading course. Let's get rid of that. So I'd like to say that they're doing better because we're positioning them to not have obstacles and barriers, but it would be indirectly.
Thank you, appreciate that.
And that's the other thing I think is that schools that do have monitoring reports, they may not, the administration may not take them as seriously as I do, but if you recall, you guys evaluate me based on how well we as an institution are doing on these outcomes. So there's a little pressure to make sure that we're ensuring students are successful because the majority of your outcomes are around student success and student outcomes.
All right, last call for outcomes for a monitoring report, item 1 on the agenda. All right, before we go to item 2, and I don't think we have a attachment for that, Michael. So you can just go back to the agenda, I guess. I just want to touch base with the technical support group, and are we carrying forward technically like everyone anticipated, or do we need to make any course corrections?
Everything appears to be fine, sir.
All right, great, thank you. All right, Jackie, back to you.
Okay, COVID-19 impact discussions. These are daily and changing daily, but the obvious impact is keeping everyone safe and students and ongoing learning. Interestingly enough, our enrollment this summer was up a little bit, and everyone went into the summer knowing it was virtual. So we were really pleased with that. We did offer 3 credit courses, 3 credit hours for free to help incentivize people attending. When we look at fall enrollment, we're down 6% compared to this time last year. And that surprises me because mentally I was preparing for 10 to 20% given the COVID situation. We are transitioning and informing our students to be prepared for virtual as we start in the fall. And that has not seemed to impact enrollment. I think people understand that this is probably the fall reality, is that we'll be virtual and blended as much as possible. The other probably biggest impact is housing. If we're virtual, students aren't going to want to spend money to live on campus, which is understandable. We're not sure at this point we want lots of people living on campus and that responsibility. So we will probably see a decline in housing revenue. However, it's important to note that a majority of our housing revenue is paid by our athletic scholarship dollars that are institutional dollars, because the majority of the students that live in housing are athletes. The other impact, and Chris might be on, if we don't open, we subsidize our food service, and there could be a positive benefit of not having to subsidize if Aladdin chooses not to open this fall, which it looks like maybe they're leaning to that direction, because if we don't have students in housing, it makes no sense for them to try to run a full food service. So we could see a positive impact there as well. And positive impact to our scholarship dollars if we're not paying the room and board that we typically do for our student athletes. I would say as an institution, we're pretty well positioned, and we're very fortunate that we've had a board that's been conservative, that we've been able to build our reserves if needed. Our biggest challenge is the expenditure limitation that kind of keeps our expenditures at a level based on a rolling full-time student equivalent average that was developed in 1982 that really needs to be revised. And I understand the reason for it, but it does limit our ability to be creative and do some other things. I did keep a promise to keep all part-time people on until June 30th. Even if they were just sitting at home and didn't have anything to do. We did tell, when we knew we weren't going to bring somebody back, we gave them at least a month's notice that, you know, as a part-time employee, we just can't bring you back at this point. So we're down, which is a good thing. We were overstaffed as an institution in that area. We're about 40% in part-time that didn't come back in July, which is another positive for the budget. So I have no concerns about being able to absorb the decline in student enrollment with some of the things that we're able to do. We are also, when we have a full-time person leave, we are evaluating, do we need to replace that position? As an organization, we have a great opportunity here now with COVID-19 to become lean and efficient. And we've realized a lot of things that maybe are not necessarily things that we need to keep doing moving forward. So those are some of the kind of impacts. I know the VPs are on. I don't know if they want to add anything or if you have any specific questions that maybe I didn't touch on. I assumed when you're talking about the impact, you wanted to know about what's the impact going to look like for, you know, the financial side of the institution. But
I think just the overall, I think it was just kind of a general, what's the new normal? How are you feeling that might look? And before we, you know, we start entertaining questions, I think it would be good to hear from the vice presidents if they have anything to add to what you'd already stated.
maybe while they're unmuting, I will tell you the thing that weighs on me the most and my biggest concern is our people and the fatigue of working from home. There's a different kind of stress level. I don't know, Dan, if you've been able to go back to the office, but I do worry about I don't want to say mental health, but I know I do worry about our people and working through this. So,
Jackie, this is Brandy. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. So just to follow up on, from the employee side, I think we are doing exceptionally well. I think far better than I ever imagined. As Jackie did say, people are getting tired. People are living in Groundhog's Day every day. But on the other side, I've never seen our staff and our employees more engaged than I've ever seen them now. We stay in touch with our employees every week, all week long, with Jackie's chat and check-ins and the vice presidents visiting with the VPs. Those happen, one time each week. We have an end of the week, what we call a virtual happy hour, where people can just jump in and talk about their week. Many departments and divisions are having, early morning check-ins on a Monday morning, touching base. How are you doing? So I think people are missing the in-person component, but we are still really working hard to keep that connection going. We are constantly sending out wellness information. Employee assistance program is there for you if they need that. So I think it's got its pros and cons, but for the most part, I think our employees are really doing well given the situation. So I don't have really anything other, anything else to add other than that. I'll just wrap it up with employees are appreciative. They're appreciative with the communication. They're appreciative with the direction and the slow, steady, cautious approach that Jackie's leading with, not returning too quickly. You can tell our employees are still a bit scared. They're scared from a health and safety standpoint. They're scared from a family standpoint. Many of them have children, and as you know, the schools, the K through 12 schools, are still kind of up in limbo, saying, you know, we will open back up August 17th, but then we all know, what if that doesn't happen? And they're concerned, if we go back, who's going to watch the children? So we're really just trying to be compassionate and careful with our decisions that we make, you know, taking all that into consideration. So that's really all I have to add. But for the most part, I'm really, really proud of our employees during this time.
Great. Thank you, Brandy. Chris, I see you're unmuted. You have a couple comments?
Yes, sir. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. In regards to the COVID impact, so you're all familiar, we did receive 3 separate federal funding sources, which are called the CARES dollars. There's a CARES 1, a CARES 2, and a CARES 3. And we have already expended numerous CARES 1 dollars, which was for the students. CARES $2 is reimbursement back to the college for different types of COVID initiatives, such as extra police security, IT equipment that we purchased. So we are reimbursing ourselves for a lot of expenditures that started from March 13th on. And that is a grant that is valid for 1 year and expires next May. So we are on a monthly basis reimbursing ourselves for a lot of COVID related expenditures. And the only other thing I'd like to mention is, you know, Dr. Jackie mentioned the expenditure limitation. And that is something that hopefully when the legislature gets back in session, they will realize that it not only impacts community colleges, but also school districts. We do need some type of expenditure limitation relief. And there was a precedent set a number of years ago. So we're hopeful that there will be some type of relief, just not sure if it will be retroactive to fiscal year 20 or whether it would be starting, say, fiscal year 21. But that is something down the line that we're hopeful to receive.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Next up, I see Mary Kay. You're unmuted.
Hi, good morning. I don't really have a lot to add. I think Dr. Elliott covered most of what the impact is for academics and how academics is coping. But I will also say I'm very, very proud of the college and of all of the employees who are involved in teaching and learning. I think we have pivoted very well into this new environment. It wasn't easy, but we did it quickly and without complaint and with actually a great deal of enthusiasm for embracing new technologies. And I think many of our faculty have discovered that they really enjoy this kind of a technology where we have a face-to-face presence, but with that virtual piece that keeps everybody safe. And it does, I think going forward, it gives us some flexibility that we didn't have before, so that, you know, one of our greatest challenges in our old environment is our geographic spread and being able to offer robust classes at each campus. And, you know, this gives us some flexibility, as Dr. Elliott had said before, to maybe have, you know, 1 day of FaceTime and, you know, a fair amount of this kind of virtual synchronous education that still gives that personal touch. And I think it even goes beyond the personal touch, although we can use our backgrounds. I think many of our students especially have enjoyed having a glimpse into our lives and, you know, the view of our homes and our pets and things like that have popped up, and people have made sort of funny comments about it, but it makes real people as a college. And, you know, so I think maybe that's one of the funny side benefits of it. But I think that we're doing very, very well. We are embracing all of the tools and technologies that the college is providing, and IT is finding ever more new tools and technologies for us. And I think that we're just going to continue to expand that going forward. There's clearly a market for it, and it's clearly working. And so I don't see us going back to what we had fully before. I think this expands our possibilities for offering courses and enrollments. The only thing that we do still have to absolutely do on the ground, and I commend the college for making this work even during COVID, is some of those hands-on pieces. You know, you can't do all of your welding virtually. Our nursing students do need to actually get in and do, they need to at least do a simulated ID. You know, you don't want a nursing a nurse at your bedside who's never practiced those things. So, but we are bringing students in very carefully and in very small groups and in limited doses, and we're getting those done. And I believe we're the only college, the only community college in Arizona that has succeeded in helping our CTE and healthcare students complete. Most of the rest have done incompletes and are still trying to figure it out. So I am very, very proud of Central Arizona for having managed this. And I thank everybody for supporting that education. So I think we're in pretty good shape. And I think the students are responding by signing up for classes. We're in not bad shape going into the fall, and we've done very well this summer. So I'll stop there unless anybody has questions.
Great. Thank you, Mary Kay. Jenny, putting you on the spot. Anything to add?
No problem. Thank you. I think it's been an interesting time that has really shown our staff and our faculty kind of what the abilities that they have that maybe they didn't have the confidence before. With everything that's gone on, it was incredible how quickly we were able to move, as Mary Kay said, and really make changes. And I think we were kind of stuck in the mindset that higher ed just in general moves at such a slow pace and that we aren't able to make changes quickly. And I think you know, the positive side of this situation is we have done just that. And I think many people have come forward. It was kind of the shakeup that we needed maybe, and that many people came forward that hadn't been as involved before, hadn't shared their ideas. And what has resulted is the fact that we're very comfortable in knowing that if things remain the way that they are through the fall semester, we're confident in knowing that we're providing students the services that they need in the fashion that you know, is helping them to do things quickly. And students are finding that they really like some of the changes that we've made. You know, when it comes to things such as academic advising, we know that we will not go back to the model that we used before. The challenge that we're having now is many more students are using academic advising, which is it's a very positive challenge, but they've made it so easy, you know, through an online format that many more students are taking advantage of it. So I think we're seeing some very positive things. The other side, you know, as Brandy had mentioned, and I think Dr. Elliott mentioned as well, is that the staff are facing challenges with fatigue when it comes to, you know, when you're sitting in your home and working in your home, really setting boundaries for themselves and not continuing to work into the wee hours of the night to get things done. So I think we've shifted also in our conversations with employees about self-care and ensuring that they're focusing on their family as well as the responsibilities that they have. We absolutely have very dedicated employees, and we have to remind them sometimes that it's okay to step back and make sure that they're taking care of themselves. So I think we've seen some very positive things, although there have been obviously negative situations in the United States in general. There have been positive things for the college and for our students. So.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. Am I missing any of the staff or faculty? I think we heard from everyone. All right. And the reason I thought it would be good for them to go first before the board is they basically answered all my questions that I had already. So I appreciate that. But any comments from the board or any contributions? Maybe somebody has some experiences on how do we do virtual meetings and all better that might be able to share with us. So go ahead.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
A question for Chris. And maybe I just understood, did I hear you mention CARES $3? You talked 1 and 2. Is there going to be a third?
Yeah, CARES $3 is a small pot, about $180 some odd $1,000. And it has to do a lot with reimbursement. Mary Kay is the project director of that. The reimbursement of different types of academic initiatives, whether we did changes in curriculum or different types of IT programs or anything of that nature. So there are three separate pots of CARES dollar funding.
Oh, thanks. That was my question. And just to comment on what Jenny was saying, at least it makes a short commute, although not a decompressing commute. But
Absolutely.
thanks.
All right. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, Rick Gibson.
Yes, sir.
My question is to the administrative team as a whole. We had mentioned, I think earlier, that the Central Arizona College programs are pretty flexible, that we're doing things that maybe other community colleges still are not able to do, and certainly some of the other K through 12 units. do we feel as a team that we are sufficiently flexible to be able to achieve valuable and meaningful outcomes, even if we are in a long-term health situation, COVID-19 or whatever it might be? Are we flexible enough to carry out our mission in an effective manner, given a certain set of parameters?
I will start, but I will defer to the VPs because they have really stepped up and led their teams through pivoting and being flexible. But I think we demonstrated it by being able to be flexible. I think the other thing too is, and I know my peers and colleagues aren't doing this, but every Monday, every day at 8:30, the VPs and I meet and we talk about any situations that's come up, because with this unpredictable situation we're in, daily we're hit with something we didn't think about. And so we meet every morning at 8:30 and we talk about something that's come up that we couldn't even imagine or think about. And then we are able to problem solve it right then and there or within the day. And so I think that has really, I mean, that's structured meeting every morning at 8:30, but it does help us then be flexible because we're not waiting a week to discuss something that may have come up. But I'd be interested to hear from the VP's perspective about our ability to be agile and flexible. The other thing too, I will add, is that many of my presidential colleagues, when I talked to them, they said, oh, we're going to pause this initiative, or we're going to pause this initiative. And I said from day one, we're not pausing anything, we're moving forward, because the minute you put a hold on something, then it's hard to get it back. And we don't want to send the message that we're caving in and that COVID's winning. We're still going to move forward with our Caring Campus initiative, with Achieving the Dream. And we had we're one of 5 colleges cohorts. And when I met with Karen Stout, the head of Achieving the Dream, she said, well, the presidents are split. You know, you're one of 2 who wants to move ahead, and the other 3 just want to put everything on hold. And when I talked to her, she said, you know, Jackie, we're not going to put the kickoff event on hold. We're going to schedule it. And if those other 3 presidents don't come, they don't come. But, you know, I like what CAC is doing as far as just moving ahead. And so we've just said forward and onward, and in the new CAC. What that looks like, we're not 100% sure, but it's forward and onward. Okay, I'm going to shut up now and let the VPs talk.
Anybody?
I'd like to add, if it's okay. I think one of the ways to really demonstrate that we are pivoting, I know we've talked about pivoting throughout this whole thing, and that's definitely what we've had to do, kind of stop and just shift. And for instance, on Thursday, we have the grand opening of our new virtual student union. So again, you know, as Dr. Elliott indicated, not stopping our student activities, not stopping trying to engage with our students, but really looking at it as how can we differently engage with those students. We're seeing that we not only are attracting the students that had been engaged before, but this is also a brand new group of students who now has a different way of engaging with the college, which I think adds just an additional layer to the service that we can provide. So student engagement is definitely one way. Just many other ways, as I've indicated, with process changes, where I think we've been able to really adjust and continue to attract our students to stay involved. So that was the big example that I had.
Good.
And if I can add, this is Brandy, and for some reason, do you see me? I don't see myself on camera.
Yes, you're on.
Oh, I am. Okay. If you would have asked me that question prior to March 10th or whatever date it was when we were told we couldn't return, I would have said, no way. Can we shift? Are we prepared for that? And now I made a complete liar out of myself, because I'm still in awe with not only how we've done it, but how quickly we did it. I can speak from talent development. We had to completely shift how we onboarded an employee, how we recruited an employee, create liaison programs between the hiring supervisor and the individual coming, on board. That person now has to be orientated, all online. We've completely had to shift our training mechanisms. No more in-person training. Everything's online. We were right in the middle of a very big benefit transition from being conventionally insured into joining a pool. That entire process had to be shifted to online. So it's been trying, but it's also been very rewarding. And my team even made a comment. They said, we didn't realize how we were just going through the motions, because that's all we had time to do was go through the motions. Now we really had time to step back, and really look at our processes to be able to have the time to make those changes and to progress. So I say now, absolutely, we are in a flexible state, and we can do anything at this point in my eyes. So
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
I'd actually like to add one other piece from the academic side, and that is that aside from the teaching and learning and the virtual environment itself, one of the biggest challenges we faced when this all started is that we rely very heavily on placement exams for incoming students. It's been a long discussion. We've been trying to, we were actually just beginning to set the stage for moving away from that. And we had a target, about a year and a half in the future. And this changed everything, because we could no longer bring students on campus to do that. We could not go out to the high schools to do that. Basically, placement exams were over. So we moved pretty much overnight to multiple measures. I know, we were all actually cheering in the background. We thought, this is great. We are not going to spend a year and a half planning this. We're just doing it. And we did it. And we don't know what the end results will be, but we do know that, for example, this summer, instead of, this actually harks back to your last discussion about the DevEd measure as a board monitoring report. Instead of a whole litany of DevEd, for example, reading and writing classes, we had the majority of our students placing themselves into English 101. So we will be able to measure the outcomes of that and find out how well they did. But I think with the additional support, our expectations are that they're going to actually do just fine. So we may have taken a giant step forward in terms of helping our students move more quickly through college and unburdening ourselves from both the cost and the incredible hassle of doing all of those placement exams and slogging through all of that. This just cuts right to the chase, simplifies things, and we're going with high school GPAs and some in-class assessments, and there you go. So, and again, people actually said, okay, we're moving forward. We're not going to stop teaching classes, so of course we're going to go ahead and do this. There were about 5 minutes of discussion, and everybody just jumped on board. So very pleased about all of that.
Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate everybody's comments. It gives me hope and a good feeling that as we move forward into this challenge that we're dealing with, if the administrators and if the educational teams across campus feel that we can deliver outcomes, no matter what the situation is, that puts Central Arizona College in a leadership position and a source of faith, I believe, in the hope in the minds of those who are struggling with the effects of this pretty nasty disease. Thank you very much, and I'll quit talking.
Great, thank you, Rick. Anyone else before we close out COVID impact? I just have one quick question, hopefully for Chris. We have a lot of buildings that are somewhat idle. Have we changed any of the preventive maintenance or any of those schedules to either compensate or stepped up? How is that? How are our physical structures being impacted with nobody there?
Well, to be honest, they're not impacted at all because facilities is still working. They're not working, they're working split different types of shifts very early from 5, 6 in the morning, and also some nighttime. So everything, the college is continuing in terms of, mowing the grass, trimming the trees, preventive maintenance is changing filters and things of that nature. Facilities has been working since they can't really just stay at home and work. They have been at every campus along with the police officers. So police officers and facilities have been working nonstop throughout this whole entire ordeal.
Great. Thank you. As I suspected, but none of us are at the campus, so you don't get to see a lot of their efforts, day to day. I think last call for item 2, COVID impact. Okay, and we've been at this an hour. How's everybody doing? We need to take a recess or continue on with item 3. Pleasure of the board.
Here.
Good. Okay. All right.
Hopefully, item three-
I'm sorry, Jackie.
were you ready for item 3?
I'm ready. Everybody else ready?
Ready.
All right.
Okay.
Everybody-
I think Dan kind of wanted us to talk about inclusion and equity program and training overview. So we launched, I think it was in May or June, 4-part series, equity training and inclusion training for all employees. It's done through Safe Colleges. They have the training modules. So we launched that. We are asking employees to do those 4 trainings. I had hoped, the plan is for those 4 trainings to be completed by December, and I had hoped to bring somebody in the fall in person to do some inclusion training, diversity and inclusion training, whether it be Ruby Payne or Mitch Hammer or somebody that could do that. We may have to pivot and do something different for the spring, but that's the fall plan. In August, I'm launching the Equity Council, which will be a group of individuals on campus that will guide our civility and inclusion statement. It hasn't been updated in a long time, so they're going to review that. They're also going to help us develop an equity and inclusion plan for the college, and also direct what training might need to look going forward. The reason I'm waiting till August is we get a lot of feedback from faculty that on important big initiatives, they would prefer that we don't launch it until they're back on contract in August. And so that's why we waited till August to launch that. But I felt that starting the equity and inclusion training, given the climate of the community, was important. And so we went ahead and launched that this summer. And so that's kind of what it looks like now moving forward, as far as inclusion and equity training and programming for the college. I did put out a statement as well that went to the college community about, who we are and that we accept all. And so that went out probably close to after the George Floyd incident happened, maybe a week after. So that's kind of really where we're at with that. And I don't have a whole lot of details or other things to add. I think you can kind of get the picture of what we're trying to achieve.
Very good.
Jackie, this is Brandy. If I can just add a couple
Sure.
things, a couple other additional things that we're doing from a talent development perspective, in reference to diversity, inclusion, training. We are going to make it a mandatory that if anytime an employee sits on any kind of an interview panel or something of that nature, they will have to have completed that training. That will be a requirement. Recently in November, our EEO policy and procedure was approved by the board. So that's out there. We are basically kind of bringing that to the forefront a little more, making it a little more visual on our homepage, posting that statement on every single job announcement and in every single job description that we have at the college. And then also working with my team to look at additional areas and ways that we can recruit nationally, internationally, and more diverse publications. So with that, I think we had already made some really good changes to our kind of in the background, our matrix that refers to our experience and education requirements. We kind of lightened that up a little bit and made some changes that I think also go hand in hand with our diversity and inclusion. So those are just some additional things that we're doing from a talent development standpoint.
All right, good, thank you. Anyone else? Members of the board, and I'm going to put Gladys on the spot. I haven't heard from her, and I'm missing your voice. So how are you, Gladys? Any comments?
I had to unmute me. No, I'm listening and I'm still a part.
All right, good to hear. Anyone else? All right. Last item 3. Hearing none, let's move to item 4, bond refinance. And Michael, do you have, yeah, very good. Okay, good. And I think that is for Chris. Are you going to lead us with this one?
I certainly will. Thank you so much, everyone. And Michael, you're the driver. So recently, during our COVID situation, the interest rate environment has been changing and fluctuating. And some of you are familiar with Nick Dodd. He is with Piper Sandler. They are a company that has been with the college working on all of our bond issues for, I want to say, since maybe even day one. I mean, they've been around for years now. And he has presented to me recently a good refunding, a market update and a refunding opportunity. So I'd like to run this by the board and get your thoughts on it moving forward. So Michael, you go to the next page. Actually, next page, please. Okay, so a summary overview. What we are looking at is to refinance or refund our general obligation bonds. The general obligation bonds were the bonds that were issued when the bond issue was passed back in 2009, 2010. Now, that was over $100 million, but currently the portion that's outstanding is about $70 million. And there's a refinancing opportunity now due to the low interest rate environment. The last time we had such a great interest rate environment was back in 2016. And for those of you that were on the board, you do remember we did refinance a portion of the bonds, $28.9 million of refunding bonds at that point to save interest, which saves then the secondary tax levy and taxpayers' taxes in the long run. So this is a recap. Next page, please. Okay, so this is the kind of a chart showing on the right-hand side are the general obligation refunding bonds that we did back in 2016. And then the left-hand column is the refunding amount that is available now for a potential refinancing. So this just shows the number of years left to maturity and the principal amounts each year and the respective interest rates. Next page. This is a summary of the refunding that we did back in 4 years ago, 2016. So what I want to point out on that is on the right-hand side, the net present value in savings. We saved about $3.5 million in interest going into the future on these refunding bonds. And the net present value savings as a percentage was 12.1%. And standard in the industry is if you can do a net present value savings, if it's in at least the 3 to 5% range, then you should really go ahead and refinance. This, back in 2016, this was actually a 12% savings. So that is why we did a refunding, and it was only a portion of these bonds that were eligible at that period of time. But we did save the taxpayers $3.5 million. Next page, please. So this is once again the savings when we did this in 2016. You see the savings column averaged about 240 some odd thousand for a total savings of $5.1 million when we refinanced these bonds in 2016. Next page. So here is a 1-year time frame historical interest rates. And the reason why Nick gave me a call, or I'm sorry, this is a 10-year, one year history. if you look at these interest rates, you'll see that they were flattening and going down. They were very low back in February, March timeframe. Then they dramatically spiked up right around March as everything was closing down. Interesting, the interest rate environment totally shot up, you know, to over 2.5 to closer to 3% of the interest rates. And then over the last few months, it has been going significantly down, where we're at right now in June, July, we're at an all-time low again. Next slide, please. And this is the GeoBond index on a 10-year cycle. So if you look at June 16, you'll see that's the last time we refunded our GeoBonds, because that's the last time the interest rate was so low. So now, if you look at the June 20th, the end of this chart, you'll see that the interest rate environment is even lower than it was 4 years ago when we refinanced a portion of the bonds. Next slide. So this is the potential savings if we refinance approximately $41 million of our remaining general obligation bonds. If you look at the second column, you will see that it's a potential cash flow savings of $7.8 million, or about $7 million in net present value savings of the interest, and it's a net present value saving percentage of 17%. So as I mentioned before, 3 to 5 is a good percentage rate to refinance. If we were to go ahead and refinance approximately 41 million, we are looking at about a 17%. So it really is a great opportune time to do this. Next slide. This is the summary of the savings if we were to refinance this 40 some odd million dollars. It's about $7.8 million, or approximately $500,000 in the savings column, a little over $500,000 a year to the end of the maturity of the bonds. So equaling about $7.8 million in savings, or about $7 million in present value of savings. Next slide. Well, that's actually the end of the slide, the regulatory disclosure. But Marco, if you can go to the previous slide. So what I'm proposing and asking the board is that Piper Sandler proceed with bond counsel, which is Gust Rosenfeld, in drawing up the appropriate documents in setting up a resolution that we could bring to the August board meeting. And two factors are involved. If we can get it done sooner than later, there's a little complication in terms of what's callable bonds. And Nick Dodd is working on when we can do this, but our first step is to get authorization or a resolution that the board would pass that you want us to proceed with this refinancing. And we could either try to get it done by the end of this calendar year, or at least get the ball in works to get it done sometime in the spring. But the first step is to pass a resolution that we do want to go forward with this refinancing. So that's all I have to present. Be happy to answer any questions. I would hope that the board is interested in this refinancing, and that I can bring forward a resolution for your approval at the August board meeting.
Mr. Chairman?
Just 1 second, David. Thank you first, Chris, for your explaining this. And I see that Nick has been with us the whole time, so thank you, Nick, for listening in. We're not, this retreat is not a place where we can vote on something like that, and I think you're aware of that. But I think we can get, I don't know, a sense of if this is interesting to the board, if we were to see something in August to vote on. That's really what you're asking about, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Sorry, David, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, that's okay, because I mean, I like this whole idea. Is there a point at which that interest rate would lock in Is that like when we do the resolution, or when does that happen in case those rates went back up prior to the refinancing?
Well, that's a good question. And the first step is the resolution. And then I turn it over to Nick to see if and when he could lock in on the interest rates. Without getting into too specific detail, there's something that's called an advance refunding. And it is something that the feds took away a year or two ago, but they are thinking of reinstating it. And that is the complication with what are some of the callable bonds. So I leave that all to the bond counsel to work out and tell us whether we'll be able to get this done this fall, or do we have to wait to the spring? But it is a definite that we will have potential savings, and we would like to lock into the interest rate environment as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Because you never know, as you've seen from the charts, it could spike up again with anything that happens in the country or the world.
And that was my thought too, because it is so volatile right now that
Absolutely.
you just don't know.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead. I saw your hand raised. So
Thank
you were
you.
next.
Because there is some time pressure on this, and I realize it's only a couple of weeks difference, but is it possible to get this on the agenda for our special meeting rather than for the regular meeting in August?
Probably not, I'm guessing, because bond counsel hasn't even received word on this. It's more of our investment counselor giving me the information to share with the board. They probably need at least a couple of weeks to prepare the documents. I could certainly ask, and if we can get it done, then I would say, let's put it on the agenda, but I can't make any promises without speaking with them.
Thank you.
Right, so Jackie, it's more of a technical question. We are allowed to have two separate subject matter items on a special meeting, right? We don't have to specify in a special meeting, like one topic.
No, you can have as many topics as you want.
All right, just confirming. All right, and Chris, I'll ask you, but I don't know if you think it's beneficial for us to hear from Nick for a couple minutes. Deanna would have to put him in the panelist view. Is that something you desire, or?
I am comfortable in what I have shared with the board, and you know, it'll just change slightly based on a final interest rate that gets locked in, and when we're ready to refinance, if and when that is, whether it's in the next few months or if it isn't until sometime in the spring. If the board would like to hear from Nick, that's fine. Otherwise, I can just present the information that is created by Nick and also Tim from Gus Rosenfeld, which is the bond counsel.
All right, I'm fine with your decision. Any members of the board have any comments? Okay, last call.
Mr. President, this is Rick Gibson, and I would just say that if there's opportunity to save significant funding, that we need to look at it as quickly and as effectively as we can. But we all know that things are bouncing around like ping pong balls, and so we're going to have to be real careful, in my opinion.
Very good, thank you. All right. That concludes item 4. Let's go to item 5, long-range capital plans.
Well, pre-COVID, I think we're probably, and I might let Chris jump in. When we talk about any facilities, I'm just going to be candid. One thing we've learned with COVID is we probably have more facilities than we need during this, but we're the only current facility plans are for the Workforce Training Center. That, of course, you know, is an ACA project, but for us as an institution, most of our long-range capital plans were looking at the baseball field, which is just about completed, and some work at the rodeo grounds, and perhaps we were looking at a practice structure for athletics. Again, I say were, because now we need to regroup as an institution and rethink about the long-range capital plans and the needs. What are our needs? We do know that our lease on the corporate center is up this time next year, and we will not be renewing that lease. Well, I hope the board votes not to renew it, but I'm not going to bring it to you to renew. How is that? That's kind of where we're at. I'm happy to entertain any specific questions. Most of our capital plans are going to include equipment replacement as needed, roofs as needed, HVA system. We've have, and I don't know if we did this, Chris, but we had on the list the HVA system at Aravaipa. One of the buildings at Aravaipa needed to be replaced, and I'm not sure we want to bite that bullet right now either until the VPs and I had scheduled a retreat for this summer. It was going to be a time to really come together and start thinking about what direction is the college going to move, facilities, many other big topics that we had on our plan, but we've decided to kind of postpone that until so that we can take all that we're learning about how we're changing our business operations during COVID-19 into the retreat for reshaping CAC as we move forward. So, Chris, do you have anything you want to add or?
Yeah, I totally agree with you that we really do not have any long-range capital plans. What we're looking at is really the short-term and the ongoing deferred maintenance items. You know, those will always continue. You know, the painting, the carpeting, the tile, perhaps the resurfacing of pavements, routine maintenance, but things that have to be upkeep and that you want to invest in. Because it's more of, I know Ernesto always likes to say, you could pay me now or you could pay me later. So it's best to address all of these types of items on a routine basis and on a floating replacement cycle, I should say. And that's what we have scheduled to do, but no specific long-range capital plans.
And I think, Dan, you kind of had asked us to have that on there. Was there something specific you wanted maybe that we didn't address?
I think it's been addressed. My thought at the time was, you know, we are doing a lot more virtual. So are there some you know, repurposing of buildings that might be considered? I know we talked about a demo in one of the residential towers. It's just a good time to do that. Those are the kind of things I was thinking was more driven by the COVID impact.
Well, yes, you're absolutely right. We are still planning to take down some of the old residence halls, quads. We initially had discussions about building another tower, but I'm not sure that we're at a point where we even want to tackle that concept at this point. And I think you have a good point. We've talked a lot about our reopen plan and how we're going to social distance, and we've had to push our thinking because we still had ITV classes on the schedule, and it was like, ITV can't happen. Those classrooms are small. They're just small conference rooms. You can't social distance in there. And besides, ITV just needs to go away. So given that ITV is going away and we have these really small rooms, what are they going to be used for? And I basically had suggested that when we go back, they remain locked until social distancing is no longer a norm, because in those rooms, I don't know if you've ever seen them, they're quite small and you can't social distance. So for me, myself and the VPs, we're just now on the cusp of having those conversations and starting to think about our current spaces and how in the age of COVID, those spaces need to get repurposed or stay offline, or do we even need them anymore? And so that definitely is something that we're going to have to build into our planning and our thinking when we go back to the new CAC.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of it. But does the board have any questions for Chris, Jackie? regarding long-range capital plans?
No, I think in light of COVID-19, those long-range plans are kind of up in the air, and who knows what we're going to look like when it comes out the other side. Although I suspect that, you know, that there was an interesting comment earlier about, you know, institutes of higher education don't move quickly, but in this case, CAC has moved very quickly and very positively. And so we don't know what's going to happen down the road yet. So I know this was something that I was interested in talking about, but, you know, given the COVID-19 situation, it's kind of right now, who knows? It's the virtual world, and the blended world will probably what comes out of this.
Right. And I think you touched on it with the ITV rooms, but, you know, and I'm sure Chris and Ernesto are looking at if there are physical structures or portions of structures that need to be mothballed, you do that as just part of the normal operation. And I don't think that's anything that we would need to be involved in. Correct, Jackie?
No. You would just need to be involved in, you know, if we're going to lease property, or if we're going to, you know, obviously take down the residence halls, those kind of things. But
right.
We have, you know, and this is really kind of a wake-up call. We have more buildings for the new higher ed world. We probably have more buildings and space than we need. We may have to enter into discussions about leasing out space for revenue, and totally looking at things differently. We've talked about in places where we have our learning center and our library co-located, let's just merge them together and maybe not staff them differently, because we're not going to need as much staff as we currently need, maybe in some aspects. So those are some conversations we're going to have to start having and looking at things differently. We are having a conversation, Chris and I think it's this week, with the city of Casa Grande, who wants to maybe purchase a portion of land that we have at behind the Casa Grande Center. I think a couple years ago, we probably said, no, we're not going to sell our land, but we probably don't need it now. So those are some conversations now that we're starting to have that we wouldn't have had pre-COVID.
All right, good. All right, anything else from the board? Last call, long-range capital plans. All right, good. Well, the next one is kind of a placeholder to talk about things that that you want to spend some time on, maybe something that's been already discussed and you want to go into greater detail, or something that hasn't been discussed that we want to go over. And before we go around the horn, I do want to recognize David Orion. He's working on a committee program, and he did agree to give us an overview of that. So can we start there, David? Are you prepared?
Sure, we can start there. And it won't take very long at all, but as you know, the committee was asked to take a look at our process for evaluating our president and to see if there might be a need to revise that in some ways. We started out by looking at best practices that are available from various governance organizations, and as well as some samples of what other colleges are doing, both within the community college community and otherwise, and comparing those to what we currently have. And I think we identified three areas that we need to look at. One is our actual policy on presidential evaluation. Secondly, the procedure that's used in carrying out the policy. And then thirdly, if we do recommend some changes, which I think we will, there is the question of how exactly do you transition from what we're doing to what we will do, because the timeline may work out in such a way that we can't simply pull the trigger and go from one directly to the other, but we may need a transition year, which probably the current year would be if we go that way. we've actually progressed rather well. We're at the point where we have at least drafts of both the policy and the procedure that we think we're ready to recommend. And we've got some options that we're looking at about that transition and how that might happen. The committee is going to meet with Dr. Elliott tomorrow to get her input and perhaps refine some of that. Following that meeting, I think we're going to be ready to bring recommendations to the board. I'm guessing, unless we run across something tomorrow we're not anticipating, we'll actually have recommendations ready to go at the end of the week. So that could go on the special meeting or the August meeting agendas, however you want to do it, Dan. Question for you or for Jackie. You had mentioned that this probably isn't going to need a formal vote, although because a policy change may be a piece of the recommendation, I'm thinking that piece may need a formal vote and the rest may not. But anyway, that's where we are. And we'll be coming to you fairly soon with the results of our labors.
You are correct. If it is a policy change, yes, but moving from one evaluation to another, that's kind of can happen without a formal vote. But that's kind of what I suspected when we were talking earlier, is that there may be some things that you find that can be refined, and those kind of things we obviously want to address before we make the full transition. I do appreciate you having a transition plan. At least you're looking at doing that. Sometimes if you move too quickly, bad things can happen. So I appreciate you doing that. And are you comfortable with taking questions from the rest of the board?
Sure. And before I forget, I just wanted to remember to thank Rick and Brandy, who have served on the committee with me and been tremendously valuable in getting this thing done.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, committee. Any questions for David? Yeah, Gladys, go ahead. Gladys, you have the floor.
Oh, I didn't know. I thought you were calling somebody else. I heard Dave say that he's meeting with Dr. Elliott to get her input, and I think that's extremely important because she needs to know exactly what she's working towards. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for her with a new evaluation, I would think. So I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah, sometimes it's more fun to blindside somebody, but it's not necessarily a good idea.
You're right.
Gladys, just so you know, Dave did send me all the documents and the information, and I was able to read through it. And so I'm not totally blindsided.
Not totally?
No, I'm not. No, your first initial thought, to be honest, is, oh, we want to change the process. And I get changing the process, but my first thought was, oh, maybe they're not happy with my performance, but that's not it at all. So.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
All right, good. Again, thanks, David. I appreciate that. We have time for a few more additional topics. Anybody go around the horn now? Anybody have anything to add?
Yeah, just one thing I've heard multiple times on the radio, at least in this area, and actually the radio stations are in Maricopa County, on the guided pathways, the CAC guided pathways program, and it's refreshing to hear that we're getting that. Since the radio stations are in Maricopa County, they're broadcasting a big market area, so it's good to hear the spots. I mean, they're not long, but they're very succinct and to the point, and talk about the guided pathways program. I don't know, does anybody else hear those?
I've not heard any.
No?
We occasionally have staff that'll come forward and say that they, were just, the music was on in the background and they hear CAC and are excited about it. So we know the spots are out there, but yeah, marketing and PR is doing a great job for sure.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear.
That's Angela, correct? She leading that charge?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, great. All right. All right, any other topics? Quiet bunch. All right. So that sounds like last call for item 6, board discussion on additional topics. We'll close that out. And the last item is number 7, board self-evaluation. So everybody did the survey. And Michael, if you want to bring that up. There weren't very many
And do
questions.
you want us to leave and just leave the board in this discussion?
What did we do last time? I don't remember.
I think everybody left, but I don't know. I don't remember. I
Oh.
think everybody left, and that's why we put it at the end. It's your pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure of the board.
I don't have a problem with people staying.
I'm not opposed.
Just add the transparency.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think group can stay if you're not comfortable with staying. Obviously, thank you for your time, but I don't see any. I'm not opposed to anyone staying. I think you've been forward with us with some of the things you're doing. So, maybe you have some input for us. So anyway, we want to go through. I think let's go with. Question 1 was the governing board of the institution is sufficiently autonomous to make decisions in the best interest of the institution and to assure its integrity. So all 5 of us answered. We've got strongly agree for 4 of the 5, and then 1 agree. So I don't see anything that's neutral or disagree. I don't know if there's a real difference here. If anybody has any comments, feel free. Governing board deliberations reflect priorities to preserve and enhance the institution. And the governing board reviews and considers the reasonable and relevant interest of the institution's internal and external constituencies during its decision-making deliberation. So 4 out of 5 on both of those. Give us a moment if we want to comment. Okay, and then the rest are all 5s. So the governing board preserves its independence from undue influence on the part of donors, elected officials, ownership interests, or other external parties when such influence will not be in the best interest of the institution. So we all agree that we are very independent. That's been my reflection too, or observation. All right, the next one is the governing board delegates day-to-day management of the institution to the administration and it expects the faculty to oversee academic matters. So we all agree on that. And just go ahead, Jackie.
I just, for Dave O's sake, when I came, the board had this really long evaluation that they did that was based on the ACCT's evaluation, and the feedback I got from the board is they didn't like it. And so I said, well, why don't you do an evaluation that just basically asks the 4 questions that are from accreditation. So these come directly, and you probably figured that out, come directly from the criteria for accreditation. And so we just said, I like to keep things simple, and I think the board approved moving to this tool because it aligns with the accreditation rather than this 10-page tool that asked a lot of questions that wasn't as meaningful to the board. But you can certainly change it again, but I just thought that you might wonder why just 4 questions. Well, they're directly from the criteria.
Yeah, I know I hate taking surveys because they always say it only takes 2 minutes and it takes 15 or 20 or half hour. So I was real surprised. It's like, that's it? We're done? But I am glad that everybody chimed in on this and took the time to do the survey.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Yes, Jackie, those did look pretty familiar. And I'm a big fan of shorter surveys and more concise evaluations. I think there really is no need to evaluate 75.5 different points when 4 will really tell you where you are. And I think it's very appropriate.
Right, good. And, you know, there are times, especially since we're in a very dynamic situation now with COVID and how things are going, that we're looking somewhat strategic, and there may be some changes operationally that we just have to challenge each other and tell us if we're getting operations when we're asking about mothballing offices or things like that. So and I think for the most part we get that feedback, and it's I don't think any of us intend to be overstepping. We're just trying to maneuver through this uncertainty just like everyone else. So I don't really have any other comments on this. Again, I appreciate the board filling this out and giving the feedback. Any comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Gladys.
I have been on the board, as you all know, a very, very long time, and have served with almost 24 other people. And right now, of course, in our own secret heart, we each know that we're the best at what we do, each one of us. But the board that we have right now is truly the best board that I believe the CAC has ever had. And I congratulate you gentlemen for being the main part of that.
Great. Thank you, Gladys. That's great to hear. We are very fortunate to have you and your wisdom on our board too. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So last call for board self-evaluation. Well, Jackie, members of the board, faculty, staff, I believe that concludes our governing board retreat agenda. I've got nothing else to add except we're deeply appreciative of your time, especially those who said nothing during this session. Michael, Rob, Deanna, I did hear from. Anybody else I'm forgetting? Part of the support. Oh, Cameron. So thank you for being behind the scenes, and thank you for supporting us. I think it was a very great, productive meeting. Went very, very smoothly, and definitely appreciate your time. And that concludes our meeting. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.
See you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye all.